The story of G.I. Joe is the ultimate fantasy of good versus evil.
Well, to paraphrase the great late Wally Wood, there's the good guys and the bad guys, and the job of the good guys is to kick the butts of the bad guys.
And so the Joe team is the great liberator of all things good from all things evil, all across the face of the globe. What's wrong with that?
With the launch of the comic book, it had a real impact on boys all across the country, and they were surprised and delighted when the toy came. And this was, the first year of Joe, so G.I. Joe became this revitalized new character in a new form. And really early in the fall of that year, we recognized that we had uncorked the phenomenon that had existed in the Joe franchise from the beginning, but now we'd recaptured it again. And so we went to Hasbro and we discussed with them and proposed to them that we do something that had never been done again, which was to do a mini-series in animation for the G.I. Joe character and for the G.I. Joe team.
What Joe and Tom had figured out was we can have an action squad. We're not going to make it an army show. Vietnam was still hovering around. Granted, it was the Reagan administration, but they wanted to have G.I. Joe be a counter-terrorist force, and Cobra was this sort of motley terrorist group.
G.I. Joe is the code name for America's daring, highly trained special mission force. Its purpose, to defend human freedom against Cobra, a ruthless terrorist organization determined to rule the world.
So we went out to California and we started talking to writers, and we were particularly impressed with Ron Friedman.
Hasbro, Griffin McCall, were looking for a writer who didn't write animation. They wanted someone who was writing for real television, live television, and they interviewed a lot of people, and I evidently got their interest, and they gave me the job.
He had a sense of design. He really understood the whole idea that what we wanted, because basically his experience was doing live action, television, action adventure. So he had a lot of experience in that way, and he loved the idea that we wanted to treat it like a live action miniseries. So because one of the things we wanted to do was to capture the exotic locations and set things in different parts of the world to give it that real excitement, because we're going to run it over 5 days. And so that would enable you to feature different members of the G.I. Joe team and different adversaries.
I said, I've got to make them characters. They have got to resonate. The design of the characters is great. How are you going to marry the interests of those kids that have to fall in love with the characters, as I did with Superman and Batman and Green Lantern? How do you grab them if you don't create characters?
We'll never forget you for what you've done, Snake Eyes. We owe you our lives.
And what's great about these characters is that they're not superhuman. They're not running around in capes. They're not endowed with alien powers. So every kid can think, gosh, I could grow up and train really, really hard and work really, really hard so that I can be a member of G.I. Joe.
Each of the characters got to have a really, great, unique personality, and I think Larry Hama did a lot of those ahead of time.
All the characters sort of fulfill these little niches that comprise this little group. That's the core of the fantasy about wanting to belong and have these friends and buddies.
There were big families of bad guys and big families of good guys. So how do you work with huge numbers? What I created was a kind of little triads or pairs who would go off together. And thereby we got to know who these characters were because they played off one another.
He did an outline first of what he had in mind, and we really liked it. Showed that to Hasbro, and then at that point we went to script, and then we started casting, and we started nailing down the kind of voices that we wanted.
No sign of Cobra.
How does it look from ground level, Scarlet?
Clear here, Duke, but I don't believe it'll stay that way.
Me neither. What's the situation on your side, Flint?
So far, so good, but things could still get hairy between here and headquarters.
The audition process for G.I. Joe was really interesting. It was classic, almost old Hollywood. Wally Burr, who is still around, and as he will tell you, was the youngest tank commander in all of World War II, Captain Wally Burr, became a cartoon director. and he got the series G.I. Joe. And he was a terrific director. He directed for a lot of psychological detail that really hadn't been done so much in TV cartoons before. And he had us lined up around the block outside his studio in North Hollywood. And the script girls were there and the producers were there, and they passed out scripts, and there were literally 50 of us standing on the street.
The casting process is first getting sketches, finding out what the hell is going on.
They had for us simple preliminary drawings from the artists.
And the guy says, this guy looks thin-faced or fat-faced or whatever. And a picture is essential to giving the actor something to kick off on. So he gets into that.
And ultimately, you get in the booth and you're behind glass and they go, okay, go. And you're looking at about 12 people standing around because there weren't enough chairs, and a big mixing board and a console like a rock and roll studio. And you do your thing. And then Wally Burr or one of the writers or somebody from Sunbow said, a little deeper, a little faster, a little smarter, a little tougher.
I always like to start out by saying, whatever you see or feel in terms of what you see in the text and what you see in the picture, give it to me, see what. And I say, okay, got another one for a second character? And I'll say, now try, and I'll give him what I would like to do.
Okay, now you're in a fight. You know, that kind of thing. And if you hadn't done that in your shower before, you'd have to dig deep.
Then I'd probably give them 8, 10 people on any given character and say, I'm happy with these, would you like to make your selection? And I'd get the word back in a few days, and then we'd make a deal with the, arrange with the agent to say, we have now selected so-and-so, so we'll be on the lookout, we'll be recording soon.
And then we started, and we did session after session after session after session, and it was probably the greatest experience I've ever had in this business. Being with all these fabulous voices, and they started bringing sort of demi-celebs in, and these old character actors from TV that I'd known years ago as a kid with these great voices, and suddenly there they were chomping virtual cigars and, playing characters with weird names.
Nothing stops them, Roadblock. If we quit, they win. Then we better not poop out. Let go of my legs, sucker.
We did 3 years of launching in the fall a miniseries. But before the third one was done, we had already started work on the series because it takes a long time to pull that all together. We opened up an LA office. We got a great team of writers led by Steve Gerber, who was like a legend in the comic book field, and Flint Dilley, who became our story editor. I think he edited 55 G.I. Joe series episodes, and Buzz Dixon, and just a really great team of people.
We had really good writers. I remember Christy Marks gave me a script. This is kind of my job test. Christy Marks gave me the script. And I read it and I said, guys, I like being paid and everything, but there's really nothing I'd change. I mean, this is, the script's just true to its own vision of the thing. It's just all there. And they said, well, we thought the same thing. I was like, oh, I guess that was the right answer.
We can't get inside. Now we can.
G.I. Joe was interesting. It was just a show for me that from the first time I saw it to when I left it, I had exactly one vision for the show. I did a lot of weird stuff in there, but I just knew what that show was, and it was very natural and it was very easy, and I don't remember any disagreements between anybody about what the show should be.
The story